And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. İlkay Beylam, the Manager of Patient-Centered Care in Turkey, Anadolu Medical Center. He's going to speak to us about the bedside shift report from planning to measurement. Please welcome Mr. İlkay.
Assalamu alaikum, merhaba. So as you might imagine, I'm coming from Turkey, which has many similarities by the culture, by the daily life. So I will be presenting about the bedside shift nursing today. First of all, where I am coming from, I'm coming from Turkey, Istanbul. Turkey is known as a European country, but 99% of its territory belongs to the continent of Asia. There are 3 bridges which combine the 2 continents together, and in 5 minutes by a car you can pass from one continent to the other very easily, which is very magical for me. I'm coming from Anadolu Medical Center, which is affiliated with Johns Hopkins Medicine in Baltimore in the US. And this is a general acute care hospital of 200 beds. Now I'll be showing you 2 pictures, and I would like to learn about the differences between the okay. Is it better? Thank you. So, looking at both pictures, can you see a difference? Yes, the patient. We think that we need to go back to the roots, to the roots of the medicine, to the patients themselves. We have been treating the patients for a very long time without the existence of patients in our minds. And that's where the patient center comes into the equation. That's what we have been doing for the last 4 years in our hospital. We were giving medicine, we were doing the practices in medicine in our hospital to the patients without the existence of patients. With the Plane Tree initiative in our hospital, we started these practices with the existence of patients. And I'll be giving you an example of it today, which is the bedside shift report. Our aim was so simple. First, to include the patients into the practice of the bedside shift report. And engage them into their care. So we made some planning, but before the planning we had 2 major issues. The first one was the time. With the time, it was so hard for us to find the real time to engage our nurses into their bedside shift report. The second one is we were using 2 systems. One is the electronic medical system. The second one is the manual system, which sometimes makes life very difficult for the clinicians. You either want to have a manual system or an electronic system in itself, but we were using a mixture of it, and that's why we had some constraints in how to find the medical records of the patient at the bedside of the patients. So we made some planning. With the planning, we first wanted to kick off, and with the kickoff, the time measurements. First of all, we wanted to measure the time which we were using the bedside for bedside shift report. What we did initially was, we were doing the shift report not at the bedside, and we wanted to measure the time frame which was spent over there. It was like 20 minutes. Yes, okay, that's great. So we needed to develop a form which was going to be a unique form for patient assessment and report itself, because as we were using two kind of medical records. The first one was the electronic medical record. The second one was the manual record. We wanted to combine them into one report. So what we did was to first work on the form itself. First, we looked at the domestic and international literature about who's using what in terms of these shift reports, and we wanted to find a way that we could develop our own form. The second one was the ergonomy of the form. What type of a form would we want to use during the shift report? An A3 type form or an A4 type form? Would it be back and forward, two-sided? We needed to discuss it with all the clinicians so that it would be something handy for everybody, simple. And when they look at the form itself, they were able to see everything on that form that they needed. We are using SBAR, situation background, assessment and recommendations for our communications, daily communications in our hospital. So we wanted to have the same language in the same form. And in addition to that, we took some recommendations, suggestions from Johns Hopkins Medicine, what type of forms they were using during their shift reports. And we wanted to have a holistic assessment about including all the aspects of the patients in their care. So a PDSA study started in our hospital. The first one was the pilots on units. The first pilots, I remember those pilot studies, they were so hard for us to implement into the hospital because people were rejecting. People were rejecting because of their culture. They were used to do the shift report except the patient. They were not with the patient. And it was so hard for them to accept the existence of patient because they feel like they were sharing some information which should have been hidden from the patient. Well, what we did after the pilot on the units was we wanted to spread it out throughout the hospital, except some units. Those units were the critical care units, and we have a bone marrow transplantation area that we wanted to exclude the practice in the hospital. So actually what we did was this. The actual report was the hospital information system with the manual records, and there was no patient involvement, and it was all virtual. So with the new reporting process, we added the patient assessment and report form, which is an A3 form, two-sided form, and you can find all the information that you need at the bedside of the patient. And in addition to this, we added the patient involvement into the process itself, and it's been more patient-centered care. There is one point very important for us, which is the conventional way of the shift report was 20 minutes, and as a result of our measurements, we saw that with the new system at the bedside, it was still 20 minutes, so we were not losing any time. We made a survey. We were so questioning ourselves. So we have the system. We are doing the bedside shift report now. But what do employees think about it? Is this just a punishment by the management? Is this just a push by the management, or do they really like it? Is it useful? So we asked these questions to our staff, and here are some of the answers. Combining many forms into one and bedside shift report simplifies my job. 28% of the employees, the respondents, told it to us. 23% said, I'm able to hand my patient off by controlling IV treatments. Think about it. I think there are many clinicians in the room. Think about a shift report. you're taking the patient, you will be spending 12 hours with the patient, you are learning about the IVs of the patient, but you never see the IVs of the patient before you go into the room of the patient. So we changed that. And it gives a great confidence to our clinicians, to our nurses, in terms of having control on the IVs, on the medicine, on the medications, and everything on the patient. 20% of our nurses, of our employees, say that they can see symptom changes with the inclusion of patients, because when we are talking about bedside shift report, it's not just a conversation between the two nurses, and the patients are excluded from the conversation. They are being very welcomed into the conversation, and as a result of this conversation, what happens is they take control of what's happening with the patient. They hear the patient, and they are able to meet the needs of the patient. And 5% said that I'm in control of drainages, catheters, and dressings of the patient. One other comment was that I prevent prejudgment by seeing the patient. Think about a world that you're hearing about a patient that you do not see. You have a judgment in your mind. Then you need to go to the room of the patient, and you need to justify your judgment by seeing the patient, with having some dialogues with the patient. But changing the way that we do the shift report, when we take it to the bedside of the patient, we are able to see the patient when the patient is being handed off by the first shift. Of course, there are some negative feedbacks that were coming from our nurses. The first one is when I enter the patient's room early in the morning, they are agitated because they need some sleep. And when they are sleeping in the morning, two nurses are coming in without asking anything, and they just want to talk about yourself. But sometimes you do not want to hear that. Sometimes your needs are more on sleep than taking some explanation early in the morning. So what we did just to take an action about this problem was, when we admit the patients, we are telling about the bedside shift report to all of our patients and asking them if they are sleeping early in the morning, because it's happening early in the morning. If they are sleeping early in the morning, would they like to be waken up by our nurses, or would they like the bedside shift report to happen outside? One other thing is, when I'm not able to use time effectively, I have problems. And we create nurse during group bedside shift report. Sometimes we are doing it as a group. And patients are scared of medical terms. So as a result of the PDSA, what we did was, we looked at the practices abroad, and we did a simulation. During that simulation, we put our charge nurses into the bed, and we made the bedside shift nurse by them. When they were feeling like they were the patient themselves, they were able to give us more feedback about what they felt in that bed, so that we could understand how we could change the bedside shift report. The plane 3 education came in afterwards, and we made a video about bedside shift report, so that this educational video could be used by our nurses. So there are 5 pillars of bedside shift report in our hospital. Which information should be used? All information. Patients need to know about everything about themselves. Language, a simple language. That's not the medical jargon. You never say that the patient is mobilized. We walked with the patient, because the patient understands from walking. The position, we have a position called the communication triangle, where the two nurses are at the feet of the patient, so that they have an eye contact with the patient. The whiteboards that we are using, and the inclusion of patient families. You see some whiteboard examples that were implemented in different departments in our hospital. You will see physicians, you will see nurses writing it over there. We have a place for the patients. Furthermore, we now started taking photographs of all the clinical team, so that patients have access to all the clinical team by their photographs and by their names. So we measured what we did. So we were looking at the bedside shift report in terms of 10 criterion. Looking at these criterion, we wanted to see how we were doing with the bedside shift report. And here are the numbers. We said if we are not really doing it, we gave 1 point to ourselves. If we are partially doing it, we gave ourselves 5 points. If we are completely doing it, we gave ourselves 9 points. There are some missing parts here as far as we see that we would like to implement. One thing here is the whiteboards. Our nurses have reluctancy in terms of using the whiteboards during the bedside shift report because they have limited time. That's why what they do is after they take the shift, they get into the room and they update it later. That's why our rates are low over there. So I would like to end my presentation with a question. The question is, actually this is a definition, and which word meets this definition? The definition itself is a conversation of two or more people about others when they are not in the same room. Do you have any guess? Gossip. Ghibet. Gossip. So, we have been gossiping about our patients for a long time because they are not with us. We say that let's stop the gossip and let's start meaningful conversations with our patients. So I'd like to thank you. Shukran to you all.